The 2024 Memphis Showboats have been eliminated from the UFL playoffs. I mean, is anybody shocked at this? I mean, really. At this point in the season, is anyone shocked at it? Here's the one image I'm going to put here. This is it. I'll put the little thumbnail one up, and I'll put it at the end. This is all I'm giving you. Look, the fact is this Showboats team doesn't deserve me to put any effort into actually, getting more than one image, showing each issue by itself. No, they don't deserve it. This team put in no effort during the season at all. And yes, that is correct. No effort. I don't care what you say about players playing hard. This team as a whole showed no effort. From the general manager to the coach to the entire roster, no effort. Why do I say that? This team's biggest issue was their offensive line. What did they do to fix that offensive line? Basically nothing. There were guys out there they could have signed. There are guys we haven't heard of they could have signed. They basically did nothing. They made maybe like one move and that was it. Basically, after about week 3, they were like, oh, our offensive line is terrible. Well, we give up. And we're shocked when that didn't work. Instead of, trying to fix something that hasn't worked at all, this isn't fixing something that's broken. To be broken, you have to have worked before. The O-line never worked this season. Even in the first game against the Roughnecks, it was terrible. They never fixed it because you can't fix something that never broke and that never worked before. So instead of replacing it, instead of getting new guys, they kept the same offensive line. And don't give me like the one or two guys they signed. They needed a full overhaul. Jerron Jones, the megastar offensive lineman, quite arguably the single biggest disappointment of a player all year. The first few games, he was horrid. And even though he's technically been better because of how bad he was to start, he has been a massive disappointment. How about the rest of that big five? Because their big five on paper heading into the season was the best in the league. What do I mean by big five? Offensive lineman, Jerron Jones. Quarterback, Case Cookus. Running back, Darius Victor. Wide receiver, Jay Adams. Tight end, Sage Surratt. On paper, heading into the season, that was the best big five in the entire league. The Battlehawks couldn't compete. Their tight end is not nearly as good as Sage Surratt on paper. And no offensive lineman they have, while they have some great ones, are as good as Jones heading into the season. Same with the Stallions. And guess what? The Showboats Big Five, massive disappointment. Basically, Davion Davis, and Vinny Papale. That's pretty much it that have actually lived up to their hype or exceeded it. That's pretty much it. Now, so I know what some of you are going to say. Oh, well, it's not really Jay Adams and Sage Surratt's fault entirely. And you know what I say to that? I agree. They can't really do that much if they can't get the ball thrown to them. You know why they can't get it thrown to them? Because whenever the team is actually doing well, throwing quick passes, for some reason, whether it's Case or T-Will, they decide to start scrambling. They decide to start going for bombs. No. Whenever something's working, the Showboats go away from it. Look at any game the past 4 weeks. Watch any of them. You will see whenever they find something that's working, they go away from it. That's not a once-in-a-while thing. That is every single game. Almost drive after drive after drive. Whenever Vito finally has a couple good runs, they don't run it for another 6 plays, maybe one really terribly designed run, and that's it. And then guess what? The next time he runs, he's not doing as good. So instead of doing it when it was working, you do it for no reason later. And it's that same issue with passing. They do quick passes, that's working. Case will have a great drive going, throwing quick passes. Then they decide to do a random shot downfield. Newsflash, it hasn't worked. That Davion Davis insane 80-yard bomb, that wasn't him, Case, throwing it 60 yards downfield. This team is not built to throw deep. You know why it's not built to throw deep? Because Case or T-Will is pressured after 2 seconds of the ball being snapped. That has been every single week. And the defense. The more and more you watch this team, the more and more you realize just how in over their head that defense played last season in the USFL. And even then, they still had that game against the Stallions where they got obliterated 42-2. They had that 31-3 game against the Breakers. Again, this defense is not nearly as good as it looked last year because last year it played in over its head. And this year, with the new coaching staff, they got rid of guys that they shouldn't have gotten rid of, great cornerbacks for no real reason to bring in Breakers that, while yes, we're with DiFilippo, were not as good as the guys that they currently had that they ended up getting rid of. So guess what? Their cornerbacks ended up being massive disappointments. Their overall defense, a colossal failure. Look at the stats that I did put up here. Oh my God. This is horrific. 198 points allowed is unbelievable. There's only been 7 games this season. And then you're talking about their yards allowed, 350 a game. Oh my gosh. If it wasn't for the fact they have 9 fumble recoveries, this team's overall turnover differential will be somehow even worse than it is. That's the only good stat this team really has, is their fumble recoveries. Because they're -5 in turnover differential. That's the worst in the league. They have 16 giveaways. That's the worst in the league. Their offense, 232 yards. Guess what? That's the worst in the league. They have the worst offense in yards and the worst defense in yards. Think about that. This team is just like that LA Chargers team that missed the playoffs, except the reverse. They are clearly the worst team in the league. I remember when I first put them at 8 a couple weeks ago, and people were like, why'd you put them at 8? You know, the Renegades are winless and all that. And I was like, dude, did you watch this team? I have seen for now pretty much like 3 straight weeks, this team is clearly the worst in the league. Their one win, their one victory was a barely won game against a terrible Roughnecks team playing Jarrett Garantano, who you could make a case for is the worst quarterback to start a game in the UFL this season. They barely won that game. It took a muffed punt. It took the Roughnecks offense doing literally nothing all game to barely eke out a win. They were handed a win against the Brahmas. The Brahmas handed them the win. 150 yards of penalties. Penalty yardage, 150. The Showboats allowed 2 touchdowns in a minute of game time. Are you serious? This team is horrific. No other team has been blown out this consistently. Even the Roughnecks have kept far more games close than this team. Because at least the Roughnecks defense shows up every couple weeks. The Showboats, no unit on the Showboats really ever shows up. And before you say, oh, week 1, week 2, no, they didn't. Their offense was horrid in the red zone. Their defense did nothing. It was a bunch of penalties by the Brahmas offense, which is why the defense looked quote-unquote good. And week 1, dude, anyone can stop the Roughnecks offense. Literally, a high school JV team probably could hold them to 25 points. And that's not a joke. If you haven't seen the Roughnecks video yet, or if it comes out after this, you'll see that one. That offense is horrid. So this one team's good defensive performance doesn't even count. Their other quote-unquote good defensive performance doesn't even really count. So what has this team done well this season? Well, nothing. Their coach, massive disappointment. John DeFilippo, I expected to be one of the better coaches in the league. Instead, again, he does stupid play calls for no reason. Their general manager did nothing to fix the biggest issue. Their QB play, a lot of it is on Case and T-Will. At the end of the day, a lot of the issues are them deciding to scramble for no reason at times instead of throwing the ball away, them deciding to try and do these random stuff. A quarterback has ultimate control of what play you do. Maybe if you're running the ball for 6 yards a carry and you've done it 3 straight plays, maybe either do a PA or keep running it. Don't do a just straight shotgun pass for no reason. That's exactly what they would do. This team legitimately might be worse than the 2022 Maulers. Talent-wise, of course, technically they're probably better. But when you look at it, the only teams that compete are the Vipers last year and the Maulers in 2022. That's how bad this team is. This team is getting blown out week after week. Even the 22 Maulers weren't that bad. I mean, oh my gosh, this Showboats team is horrid. This is the longest eliminated playoff or whatever, because this team deserves to be hated. This team is horrid. This team is terrible. And the worst part is, if you're a fan of them, because I know some of you are, you have to be praying for them to keep losing. You know why? Because if this team pulls off one of these random-ass wins in the last couple weeks of the season, it's going to infuriate you. Because you're going to say, why couldn't they do this at any other point in the season? At this point, if you're a Showboats fan, you should just want them to lose out. Get that number 1 overall pick, which even then, they could do a 2022 USFL and have the final game before the number 1 overall pick, which then they'll still probably lose to the Roughnecks. This team is ass. They are the worst team in the league. They very well might be the worst team in ultramodern spring football history. This team is terrible. They deserve to miss the playoffs. I am so thankful this team will not be in the playoffs. They are horrid. The biggest disappointments of the entire season. Absolute train wreck. Failure of a franchise. Abysmal performance. John DeFilippo might not be here next year. Their GM might not be here next year. Jaron Horton, please come save this team if you're not going to save the Roughnecks. Au revoir. Goodbye. No one cares about this team anymore. Goodbye, Showboats.
All right, that'll do it for us. The Arlington Renegades win 47-23 for our